Good morning. This is Greg Cooley. I'm a Sunday school teacher here at First United Methodist Church in Corinth, Mississippi, and we're delighted to have you with us today. Anybody ever told you what to do? A parent, a guardian, a teacher, a coach, a boss, a spouse, a child? We don't like it, do we? We don't like to be told what to do, the instruction. We don't like to be told what to do, the correction. We like to do what we want to do, don't we? Well, throughout the Bible, there are a number of thou shalt nots. There are also a number of directives from God where He says, don't do this. You know, if you're ever going to take instruction from anybody, any entity, any being, I would think that that being should be God, the ruler of the universe, the lover of all mankind. If God tells me, don't do this, maybe I should sit up and take notice. Well, one of the admonitions from Scripture that God gives us over 80 times is, don't fear. Over 80 times God's told us, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Why? What's such a big deal about fear? Doesn't fear protect us? Well, momentarily. Doesn't fear direct us? Well, sometimes. But mostly, fear does what? Well, it strangles us. It makes us stop. Sometimes it prevents us from being what we ought to be, from doing what we ought to do. We all know this is true. You're afraid that the girl across the hall will not say yes, so you don't walk over there and ask her to the dance. So how do you know whether that beauty would say yes or not? You're afraid that the boss will say no, so you don't ask for the promotion or ask for the additional responsibility, so you don't do it. And what happens? We don't reach our total potential because we're fearful. I think that's one of the reasons that God said, don't fear 80 times. Because He wants you to reach your total potential. He does not want you to be stymied. He wants you to be the best you can be. So let's look at Scripture today and find 4 or 5 specific verses of Scripture where God says, don't fear. And He gives us a promise related to it. First of all, way back in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 31, He says, He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear. Do not be discouraged. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. Do not fear. Now, if I really believed He would never leave me, if I really believed He would never forsake me, then that part about do not fear would come naturally, wouldn't it? But sometimes I don't believe that completely. Sometimes I let the cares of life influence me to the point that I second guess God. And my trust is not what it should be. So therefore, I do fear. God knew that about us. So He said, after the admonition of, don't fear, do not be discouraged. Why did He add, do not be discouraged, to do not be afraid? Well, He knew what fear does to us. And He knew that in the end, if I'm discouraged, I'll not do what I'm supposed to. I'll get off track, and I'll not be what I'm supposed to be. When I'm in a fearful situation or an emotional challenge, I really envision God saying this Scripture to me personally. So let's rewind it and do it as if God were saying it to you personally. God would say, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Don't be afraid. Doesn't it make a difference? Right there you are in the middle of your fear and you imagine God talking to you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. And in the middle of my fear, in the middle of my challenge, when I do that, some of my most painful moments seem to disintegrate because I know He is saying that to me. These are His words. They're His Scripture. And when they come from Him, and they come from Him on a personal basis to me, it shatters my fear. It does not leave me discouraged. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good, for those who love Him, for those who are called according to His purpose. If all things are working together for my good, if I really believe that from Romans, then, challenges of life, the things I fear, the stock market, the pandemic, my children, the future, the things that haunt me the most will leave me. If I believe this verse of Scripture that says, all things, in all things, God works. Even the bad things? Yes. You'll have to admit that in your personal life, some of the greatest times of growth for you came at times of challenge, didn't it? We're told that, invention comes about because of necessity, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes in your life, your greatest moments of growth come out of necessity of reaching to God. We reach to God in times, all times. And if we reach to God during the times we are most fearful, it'll turn out okay. We're promised that from this verse of Scripture. How about Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 1? Do not fear. Another of those 80 admonitions from God for us not to fear. For I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Do not fear. I've been a Christian about 50 years, and I'm still in awe of God. Of all the things He's created and the universe, those are awesome things. But the thing I'm most in awe of about God is that He personally knows me. He personally knows you. And He personally is saying this to you. Do not fear. For I have redeemed you. I've called you by name. You are mine. Now I'll tell you, you can think of some of the most powerful people in the world, and if they held something and they said to you, this is mine, you'd probably be fearful to take it from them, wouldn't you? You would probably be fearful to challenge them on that because of their power and because of their might. I feel the same way when God says something is His. I am His. So the devil should be fearful of touching me, of hurting me, of shaming me. But he still tries, doesn't he? And sometimes what he does is just a lot of noise, just a lot of bluster. It's not really anything that directly hurts me, but I let it because my fear. Fear is one of the easiest vehicles the devil uses to touch you. Don't let him do it. Because God says, there's no need to fear. I've redeemed you. I've called you by name. You are mine. 1 John 4, verse 8. Perfect love casts away all fear. Now what is he saying here? Perfect love casts away all fear. Yes, sometimes when I'm fearful and I feel the love of my family, the fear subsides. But all fear? I think we're given a little code here by John because he's describing God, perfect love. So if we read it like that, God casts away all fear. Perfect love is God. God is the only perfect love. He's the only perfection that's ever been in creation, in the universe. He's our example of love to one another. And sometimes when you see someone else in fear, maybe you can be God's vehicle of perfect love that day in that situation. And then they can say, perfect love casts away all fear. And lastly, Psalm 18, verse 2, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. I am not afraid. Psalm 18:2, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. I'm not afraid. Why don't you say that every day? Let's do that as an exercise together during times of challenge. Why don't you say every day, as the psalmist said, the Lord is my rock, my deliverer, my fortress. I am not afraid. Trust Him to deliver you from every fear. Because when you truly believe and you truly trust, you do not fear. And when you do not fear, you're strongest, you're the best, you'll be all you can possibly be. We hope you're all you can possibly be at First United Methodist Church. We hope this time together has been fruitful for you, and we hope that you'll go through your day without any fear, that God will be seen in you, and that others will feel that perfect love flow through you. God bless.